Hi everyone, you've tuned into Anime Huddle coming straight from Radio LUMS, and this is your RJ Namrah speaking. Welcome back to another episode with us, and this time we're going to delve into the profound yet simple movie A Silent Voice. So to give a bit of context first, within the broad spectrum of anime films, one often finds references to the great works of Studio Ghibli or perhaps popular titles such as Your Name. Our subject today is a film that, similar to Ghibli movies, has garnered quite some attention since its release. A Silent Voice was released in the summer of 2016 across Japan and subsequently became the talk of the town. Produced by Koto Animation, the 2-hour movie based on a 2014 manga explores heavy themes such as bullying, disabilities, self-injury, and teenage relationships. With extreme sensitivity and simplicity, it navigates narrating a touching account that leaves the audience in tears from start to finish. The story is told from the perspective of our main character, Ishida. Ishida suffers from social anxiety, unable to make friends or talk to anyone outside his family. Through a series of flashbacks, we learn that when Ishida was in middle school, he bullied our female lead, Nishimiya. Nishimiya, being deaf, required extra assistance in school from her peers, and initially the other children were willing to help her. But as time went on and the novelty of her presence wore off, the other children began to see her as bothersome and started bullying her. Ishida takes the lead in this bullying, culminating in an incident where he pulls one of Nishimiya's hearing aids, causing her to bleed from the ear. This is depicted as the turning point, after which Nishimiya's mother pulls her out of the school, and Ishida alone is shamed for his actions by everyone. This shaming follows him throughout middle school to high school as something to constantly haunt him. But the crux of the story isn't about the consequences of his actions, but rather what he does to correct them, like learning sign language, the very hand motions he once ridiculed. Ishida also musters the courage to try to apologize to Nishimiya and return her notebook that she left behind when transferring schools. Still, due to his anxiety, he's unable to communicate himself properly, and instead, after a short conversation in sign language, they become friends. This unexpected friendship thus becomes the focal point of the movie. We see both Ishida and Nishimiya struggle to close the gap that exists between the two of them. Ishida feels as if he does not deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Nishimiya sees herself as a burden to others. They're both very similar in this, the former bully and the bullied, and how they hate themselves and are constantly apologizing just for existing. Today, we're going to try to dissect this seemingly simple story by looking at what it's trying to say and why the message was so vastly impactful. So going a bit deeper into the story now, part of why this movie was so popular was the novel way in which it approached the problem of bullying. Usually, we're shown the bullying through the eyes of the victim, who manages to eventually defeat their bully in some way. However, in A Silent Voice, we are shown bullying from the eyes of the bully. When we think of bullies, we often think of individuals who are drastically deviating from the norm and are in no way supported by society in the deviation of this behavior. But the truth is, bullying is a situation that's not a singular, rare case, but rather the result of the collective behavior of everyone in the situation. In middle school, Ishida is initially indifferent to Nishimiya's presence, but when he notices the frustration and backhanded ways in which their classmates would treat her, he sees that as an avenue to tease her. Everyone else in the class laughs at Ishida's actions. They may not have directly participated the way he did, but definitely supported and egged him on. On top of that, even when they were initially getting along with Nishimiya, there was extreme insincerity in that relationship. Her being deaf was seen more as a grim curiosity for them, which is something we often see with the treatment of disabilities. There's an almost perverse reaction mixed with embarrassment on behalf of the disabled person. For the kids of this film, Nishimiya's disability was at first like a fun game to them, with her tiny notebook as the tool, but precisely as their relationship was built on fascination rather than friendship, they began to exclude her so quickly and easily. You might be wondering, where were the adults during all of this? They did not know what was going on. Their classroom teacher is actually aware of the bullying, as it occurs right in front of him. But there's a shocking indifference from him towards it all, except for a few customary scoldings to make it seem as though he's done his part in correcting the children. He has no interest in the situation at all, until the principal catches wind of the bullying, and a culprit must be rooted out. It's a curious thing that the children themselves never identified Ishida as the bully, but rather only did so at the urging of the teacher. You would think that the teacher would be present as a regulating presence, but rather was a complicit one, and the person to pin all the blame on only Ishida. This seems to highlight the convenience of having one person to condemn, something that the kids learn in this situation from the adult, because you're removed from any complicity you might have had, and you don't have to be involved in whatever consequences that emerge. Only one person is essentially removed from society. Along with that, we see a frustrating reality depicted, in which the school lacks the infrastructure or capacity to deal with Nishimiya's disability. Relying on her friends to help her take notes in class is not a sustainable way for a student to keep up with their education. Beyond the bullying, we also see that Nishimiya lacked an environment that allowed her to participate in class to the same degree as her friends. In fact, the bulk of the facilitation fell onto her classmates, which was the point at which several of her classmates began to feel resentment at having to accommodate her and at the occasional attention teachers threw at her. This served as the foundation upon which Nishimiya's insecurities were built on. Throughout the story, she feels as though she is at fault for the bullying she receives, in part because the bullying is based on her requiring help in classes. If she was not deaf, then she could keep up in class and fit in, and so not be bullied. Therefore, she doesn't seem to blame Ishida or anyone else for the bullying. Instead, she internalizes that as being justified. The movie also explores how, just as in real life, the characters grow tired of helping Nishimiya. It's easy to see ourselves as being paragons of morality in times of comfort. Miki, who was one of Nishimiya's classmates in middle school, was one of the kids who helped out Nishimiya the most. But when her own grades began to suffer, she stopped being helpful. That's a brutally honest representation of how some of us would react in such a situation. It also seems to be sending the message of how quickly the roles can reverse. One minute you're friends, the next you're strangers. This dilemma constantly plagues Ishida, since he wants to understand what it means to be friends. Having been betrayed once, he wonders the reason behind friendship. If you need it, and you do, what's a good reason for it? Can you even hope to become closer to another person without hurting them, or being hurt? Through this dilemma, the movie depicts a parallel between Nishimiya, who was unwillingly deaf, and Ishida, who willingly became deaf. Due to his fear of other people, he began to dissociate from them, to the point of projecting his own thoughts onto them as things they're actually saying about him. He's also too afraid to look anyone in the eye, since he says it's easier to look downwards. And the brief moments in which he does look at them, he doesn't see their faces. Instead, he envisions an X sign over each of their faces, erasing individuality. And so he makes sure that he never has to be present or perceived in the world again. Now, even though we've run through quite a bit of the story and the corresponding message, let's talk specifically about the moral dilemmas that the movie brings up. Since a large part of the universal relatability of A Silent Voice had to do with the lingering food for thought it left us with. So first, let's go over the role of children in this movie, since it is based on adolescence and specifically the type of bullying and social exclusion that they create. The movie doesn't seem to be portraying these children as evil or inherently bad. There also isn't any specific background given for the childhood homes of these children, so reducing them as products of bad parenting isn't what's going on. Instead, there's a type of innocence that the movie portrays, even when these children are acting as bullies. The key observation seems to be that children are especially attuned towards emotions, and are very perceptive to specifically uncomfortable types of emotions. And that is why they can be so cruel, not because they're lacking social awareness intact, but because they're so hyper-aware of potential sites of embarrassments. But the reason why we still see some innocence preserved in them is because even though they're aware of these emotions, that doesn't mean they know what to do with them, so they act in the most intuitive and visceral way, through rejection. This ties into a complicated phenomena that the movie explores: uncomfortable realities and uncomfortable relationships. There's no straight answer about what's right or wrong. Take when Ishida wanted to be angry at his former friends for pinning all the blame on him and bullying him in turn. But then he realized that it wasn't justifiable for him to take the moral high ground, because at the end of the day, he also did the same exact things to Nishimiya. a circle of karma you might call it. There's also the fact that we all deep down think that if we saw someone doing something wrong or behaving offensively towards us, we would react in the supposed correct manner. But that's not the truth. Take the moment in which Ishida saw his classmate at the verge of having his bike stolen, and how much he deliberated on helping him. He only decided to help after making eye contact with the classmate, and even then, instead of rightly being angry at the thief, he meekly offers his own bicycle instead. This shows just how hard it is for a person to step in, and even when they do, it's not exactly the superhero enactment of supreme justice you might want it to be. One of the most profound scenes in which the movie depicts this uncomfortable dilemma of things not going in the linear fashion you'd expect them to is when Nishimiya and Ishida fight in the beginning of the movie. Nishimiya had cleaned up Ishida's desk after his classmates dirtied it, but instead of him being grateful or taking the moment to reflect on himself, he started to physically fight her. Nishimiya, in perhaps the only scene in which we see her depict clear anger and her own agency, instead of constantly masking with smiles, fights back and she cries that she's just trying her best. We also have to think about the label of being a bully. How does this label work and for whom? It doesn't seem to be for the victim's benefit, as in Nishimiya's case, but rather as a collective satisfaction on the part of everyone who is an outsider that they get to punish this individual. And so the label of a bully becomes appropriated by society in order to isolate that individual, to feel that justice is being delivered and that they're a part of delivering that justice. Of course, that's not how it ends up working. This isolation from society leaves us with the question that where do such individuals go? It didn't matter how much time had passed since Ishida last bullied someone, and it didn't matter that he had made amends with Nishimiya. As soon as his high school classmate discovered that he had been a bully, once again he began to be bullied instead, but this time covertly, with the guise of rightfully telling Ishida off, but in reality just isolating him from society based on events they had no intimate knowledge of. There's also the issue of responsibility. Until how long are you meant to pay for your mistakes? Especially when those mistakes aren't as clear-cut and sole responsibility as they seem. Of course, Ishida should feel shame at his past, but does that mean that he deserves every bad thing that happens to him in the future just because of an incident that happened in his childhood? It's a complicated take, because we don't want to erase the accountability that bullies need to go through, but we don't want to minimize the trauma of the victims. But let's look at an example from the movie to help us think here. Ishida becomes the victim of a cyberbullying incident in which someone falsely impersonated him and posted a picture of him jumping into a river that wasn't allowed for swimming. In reality, he had jumped into the river to look out for Nishimiya, who had fallen in there. The consequences of this incident were that Ishida got suspended from school, but when he meets the perpetrator of the incident, he discovers that it was Nishimiya's sister. He couldn't bring himself to be mad about what had happened, regarding it as natural, since originally he was the one to blame by bullying Nishimiya in the first place. Even though Ishida did do something wrong, does he have to pay the price like this, even when he's reformed and Nishimiya herself forgave him? Until when does he have to be condemned like this? And who has the power to forgive him if it's not the victim? Who exactly is owed an apology? Because as we see in the movie, several characters felt Ishida owed them an explanation and apology despite not being involved in the bullying incident at all. But it's not as if Ishida was totally isolated, as we see him gradually being included in society again. But what happens once the world is willing to accept you again, when you are part of the world again? And how long will you be a part of this world until your past mistakes or current actions are held against you? Also, what exactly is the approach that the movie is taking towards forgiveness? We constantly see Ishida desperately trying to redeem and atone for his past actions. He's clearly regretful and disgusted with the way he bullied Nishimiya. And so, forgiveness is always the central question of the movie. It seems that through Ishida, the movie wanted to demonstrate that in order to be forgiven, first a person has to take the uncomfortable step of making amends, and that this forgiveness does not come without atonement. It also comes with the knowledge that whether or not the other person forgives you is out of your control. But what you can do is put in all your effort towards remedying the past and then having the courage to face yourself. So to come closer to what we can conclude about A Silent Voice. The moral seems to be that in your adolescence, you will go through difficult things that aren't so straightforward and untangling, and they shape you permanently. Often, this is a result of your own actions. But running away and constantly blaming yourself isn't the solution, nor is it conducive to coming near a solution. Rather, it's the courage to face these difficult realities that allows you to move forward. We can see this message depicted in a cinematography technique that the movie uses. At first, the movie starts with a dark screen and a tiny hole like a tunnel. By the end, the same dark screen is shown again, but this time the hole opens, letting light come into the tunnel. Through that, we understand that change from within is crucial to change on the outside. And so with all that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning into Anime Huddle with Radio LUMS so far, and do look forward to the next episode. See you next time and goodbye.